Welcome to our broadcast tonight. Film director Oliver Stone. His new film is Heaven and Earth. Also the former chairman of Bloomingdale's, Marvin Trabb. And we will have the owners of 4 great restaurants here to talk about the restaurant business. The owner of 21, Four Seasons, Le Cirque, and the Russian Tea Room. We begin with Oliver Stone. He is one of Hollywood's most controversial directors. He may be America's ultimate revisionist filmmaker. He forced the nation to take a new look at history with landmark films such as Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, and JFK. In his latest work, Heaven and Earth, he tells his true story of a Vietnamese peasant's survival during and after the war. And for the first time, an Oliver Stone film is built around a woman. We're pleased to have Oliver Stone join us for a conversation about his film and his career. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
It's great to have you here. This is a new, tell me about the beginning of the film. I mean, it is now described as a trilogy, from Platoon to Born on the 4th of July to this film. But when you began Platoon, did you have any notion that you wanted to do 3 films about Vietnam?
No, I never would have expected to do a film about a boy in a wheelchair or a Vietnamese peasant woman. I wasn't interested in that. 10 years ago, it would have seemed impossible to me. I think each film took me to another place. I stretched in a way, and I became more interested in other people. And I think I had to go through my own story first, in a way, before I got interested in Ron's story or in Leilie's story.
And what brought you to this story, and why did you think it was important, based on 2 novels? I mean, two books.
Well, after I did Ron Kovic's movie, which was really about the return home after Vietnam, with the people who came back to this country, I felt that to complete the sort of experience, the eyewitness experience, it was necessary to really do the Vietnamese side of the war, what they suffered, because our suffering, I think, can only really be measured by what they suffered. So I read the first book by Leilie, When Heaven and Earth Change Places, and I was really moved by the raw and the naive experience that she had. She had a life. I mean, if life is a roulette wheel, she hit every ticket on the roulette wheel. She was a peasant. She was a spy. She was tortured.
Spy for the Viet Cong.
She was a spy for the Viet Cong. She was tortured by the government side. She was raped. She was a mistress of a rich man in Saigon. She was a beggar in the streets. She was a prostitute.
Married 3 times.
She became an American housewife. She was married twice and had 3 children with 3 different men, and she was also a very astute American businesswoman. She fought back. I mean, she was not the typical victim by any means. She was a fighter and a warrior. She won my respect. I met her. She took me back to Vietnam several times. I went to her village. She inculcated in me a respect for Vietnamese life. She taught me agriculture, which I didn't know. I mean, to go back to understand what we as infantry soldiers, when we walked through those villages, we walked right through the rice paddies. We destroyed the shrines. We destroyed the houses. We did not understand that the land is an integral and spiritual part of the Vietnamese experience, that growing rice is a spiritual activity, that they bury their ancestors next to the rice fields because the spirit of the ancestors lies over the entire village. So when they ingest the rice, they eat the rice, it's also an act of worship. They're ingesting, in a sense, the spirit of the ancestors.
Much has been made in terms of talking about you, that this is a film about a woman, and much has been made about the other films that you have made. Was this in any way a leap for you? Was this an effort for you to reach in and find a different side of you to tell this story?
Absolutely.
How so? Tell me.
Well, a woman per se, let's say that Leilie, by playing all these roles in her life, she wore all these masks, in itself suggests a tremendous fluidity of character. I think a woman, in a sense, is more like water. I think sometimes, to be simplistic, I think men can be a bit like rock or a little bit rigid. And I think that through Leilie, I was able to understand, first of all, the Buddhist law that life is truly change. Things change. Everything changes for Leilie. And where she was able to survive against her adversity was in her ability to change and her ability to adapt to change. So she survived. And she grew, and her spirit grew. And at the end of the day, she was able to forgive the men who had hurt her, the people who had betrayed her.
Because of her faith. Because
of her faith.
Yeah. And is this what brought you, or was it early on, brought you to Buddhism yourself? This
Well,
experience
let's just say that, you know, I've always been exposed to the East since I was 18 years old.
And Asia has always been a special fascination for you.
But I never really understood Leilie's faith until I was there. I mean, when you see it, it works on a daily basis. It's not like something you'd go to on a Sunday to a church. You know, you're there every day. You live it, you feel it. The monks are part of the landscape. Buddhism is really awareness. It's a heightened awareness of everyday life, whether it's breathing, eating, praying, meditating.
So are you a Buddhist?
You're asking me another question. I'm talking about Leillie now.
No, all right, but go ahead, because I mean, we're also interested in you and your own experience, and in describing how it had helped her survive, and it had been the capacity to change and the capacity to forgive came from, in part, the fact she was Buddhist.
Tremendous compassion in this woman, and a belief in the spirit world, worship of ancestors, worship of her family. And I think that she had a lot to teach me, and I think the Vietnamese have a lot to teach Americans, because whereas, let's say, we suffered 60,000 dead in the war, they lost 1 million to 2 million people. They have more than 100,000 missing in action. I mean, their scope of suffering was much more enormous than ours. So, in a sense, by being able to go back there and live her experience, I was able to understand and put our suffering into perspective.
All right, I don't want to let the point go, though. Has it changed your religion? And have you become a Buddhist?
Well,
I mean, why isn't that a hard question?
Well, because it smacks of organized religion, and I think I have to emphasize to you that Buddhism, to me, is not an organized religion. Organized religion is for people who are scared of hell. I think spirituality is for people who have been to hell, and I think that Buddhism doesn't make any claims to be organized, whereas you can be a Christian, you can believe in Jesus, you can believe in God, Western God, a concept as I do, and you can also practice awareness. You can practice Buddhism. You can also be a Jew and practice Buddhism. It's not exclusive. I do have a problem.
So you can believe in the tenets of Buddhism and
correct.
The philosophy of Buddhism without necessarily somehow going through some ritual of becoming something.
It's not arcane, it's not mystic, it's simply awareness. I do have a problem with original sin, which is...
You're against it.
I do have a problem with it. I think that it's a Western concept, and I think in the East they say babies are born happy. You see it on their faces, they smile. So part of the purpose of life is to preserve the happiness. So let's say concepts of Western guilt are difficult for me. I will go that far, and that's part of the reason I made the Jim Morrison movie, because he seemed to me to be a creature that was not avoiding, but let's say running from any fear or guilt. And I do have a problem with that.
What is it about this story that you think will be attractive to audiences?
I think it's a story ultimately about any adversity that we face. I mean, it's a spiritual odyssey. It's anyone who faces disease, who faces, even in peacetime, there are adversity. Yeah, it's about your spirit. What do you do with how do you deal with life? How do you react to life and all the problems that life brings? This woman has seen all degrees of suffering, has seen all the sides of men, has carried with her much man-hatred. There's a monk in the film who accuses her also of having man-hatred.
Let me talk about the casting a little second. You found a young woman to play Leillie who had not acted?
Ever. Never been in a high school play or anything.
She came either with herself or with a friend to an open opportunity to meet with representatives of the film. Were you there?
No, I was not at the first audition. We auditioned 18,000 Vietnamese all over the country. We sent out casting crews, put them on tape. She walked in, and the casting people thought she had charisma. And put her on tape. Flew her to Los Angeles. I met her. She walked in the room. She was spectacular. She was about 4'11", 95 pounds. But she had a great beauty about her. She had beautiful eyes. She had a great spunk and spirit. She'd been a boat person. She grew up in a poor family here in America. Her family at that time was on welfare. And she had this wonderful smile. She just encompassed the room with that smile. It wasn't too hard to follow up with that. And We tested her many times on video and on film. We put her in with Joan Chen and with Tommy Lee Jones, who was about 3 times her size, and Hang Nor, from Killing Fields. Right. And they were professional, and they helped bring her up. We were nervous. The whole film rides on her shoulders.
Sure. And she performs magnificently.
We went out to Asia, and we started shooting, and we kept our fingers crossed.
Yeah. Set this film up. It's Don't Want a New Boyfriend. What is this clip that we're going to see?
This is halfway through the movie. She meets she's in Saigon, and she's working as a hostess in a Korean bar, and she meets Tommy Lee Jones, who's a GI on the street, and he follows her home, and he tells her, he's persistent. He wants to meet her, and he wants to talk to her. She doesn't really want to meet him because she doesn't like men at this point of her life.
Roll tape. Here it is. Tommy Lee Jones. You worked with him. He played Clay Shaw in JFK. First romantic lead, as far as you know?
Well, since Coal Miner's Daughter, when
Yeah.
he was with Sissy, yeah,
Right.
this is a role for him where
what is it about him
tender.
that somehow...
He's an interesting character. He's a bit like America itself in Vietnam. I mean, he's reaching out to help her. He wants to meet an Oriental wife, and he marries her. He brings her back to San Diego, and it looks like it's going to be a happy ending. And things are tough in America. It's sort of like when Americans were in Vietnam, they were a bit of we were big shots, and then a lot of us, when we came back to civilian life, were nothing. And I think that Tommy goes through that change and financial frustration in the States. And I think he represents a lot of what Vietnam veterans went through back here. And I'm not going to tell you the ending, but it does get very complex.
You filmed this in Thailand.
Thailand, yes.
You put a documentary crew in Vietnam to shoot some...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have quite a few landscape shots from Vietnam. About 20, 30 shots are from beautiful shots of...
Why didn't you shoot it in Vietnam?
Because it's so beautiful. It's an amazing looking place.
Why didn't you shoot this film in Vietnam?
Well,
Rather, why'd you shoot it in Thailand?
There's 2 problems. There's a United States embargo still 20 years after the war.
So you couldn't have shot it, the United States would not...
No, and also the Vietnamese government objected, to be honest, to 2 or 3 sensitive moments where Lê Le's book is critical of the Viet Cong. So there was hardliners on both sides in America and in Vietnam.
Yeah. There was also raised in some of the stuff that I read some fear that there would be people who would bear such remembrance of pain that the war had brought to them that they...
I don't think so. I think that the movie is about healing, and it's about moving on and forgiving your enemy. So, that's what Lê Le's message is, and I hope people who see the film understand that. If there are people who are going to see it, they're going to be hardline, and they're going to say they're going to become angry in both countries, in America and in Vietnam. So, but I think the majority of people will see this as a healing film.
By this film, you complete your sense of what you wanted to say about Vietnam.
I completed, let's say, the personal eyewitness testimony that I'm from all 3 sides. Ron Kovic, my own, and I think that there's, you can do the macro picture of what the commanders were going through, what the politics were. See, Vietnam to me, they keep saying, it's why are you so obsessed? It's not like I am that obsessed. I don't think. I do feel that Vietnam is a state of mind. It's not a piece of history only. It's a state of mind because it's about America intervening in third world countries. It's about America being a global cop, not working with the United Nations, just going in and intervening, and not knowing the country that you're intervening in, not understanding the local spiritual values or culture, whether it be Mogadishu or Panama or Vietnam. This thing is going to go on and on. We've had 6 or 7 interventions since Vietnam.
Speaking of that, you're making a film about Noriega?
Yeah.
With Al Pacino in the lead, playing Noriega?
Yeah, looks like it.
Go ahead.
It looks like we go next May in Panama.
Essentially an a biographical...
Not really. It's more the last couple of years of the regime when things got crazy, and it really is satiric in tone. It's not quite like the investigative JFK movie. It's more satire.
Well, speaking of JFK, it's inevitable to come to that when you have an interview with you and a conversation with you. Any regrets you have now? I mean, it brought a ton of attention on you. Both sides jumped on you. People rose to your defense. People jumped on you. I
still think, for me, it's one of my best films. It's one of, I always felt like it's more of a philosophical film. It's about reality and who owns it and how we perceive it, as opposed to being a political statement. It never, I always positioned it as a counter myth, because I said we don't have all the facts. And I never claimed to know who, you know, I believe that Garrison has a very strong point of view, and I happen to agree with it. But I think the film
he
is...
He suddenly died, did he?
He just died, yeah. But I think the film is framed as his point of view. It's not like all the perceptions in the film come from his mind. And I think sometimes people
I don't think that
jumped on it as if it were trying to be an objective truth. It was not set out to be.
This was just the truth as Jim Garrison saw it in your mind? In your mind, that's what you were shooting?
Absolutely.
Jim Garrison's truth.
And my own, too, but I was behind it. But I framed it as Jim's.
So you believed as Jim Garrison did, essentially?
I believe in most of what Jim said. There are some things that, you know, one can dispute, but essentially it's my perception, too. But you know, it was set up as a counterattack on an established Warren Commission that had existed for 30 years and was being well sold on television and in magazines. We didn't have time to present the Warren Commission side of the argument.
So what's happening, though, it seems, and almost as an aftermath of JFK, with case closed and with other things that have stepped forward, more and more people seem to be coming, and tell me if you think this is wrong, to accept the Warren Commission.
That's not true at all. On the contrary, there's been an orgy of media attention given to the Oswald did it alone theory, and it's sort of invaded our national, you know, it's been like the political party line in the media for the 30th anniversary, which we all saw this coming. Right. But you have to know... The
political party line for the 30th anniversary of the shooting was that Oswald did it alone.
But
and who's the party line of what?
Well, of all networks, Frontline, of Newsweek, of Time. But you have to notice...
Why is that a party line, Oliver? Why is that not just their own investigative process led them to that conclusion?
Because if you read these things through and through, they set up all the counter-arguments as straw men. They knock down any conspiracy-type argument. They ridicule it, and they don't even give it full weight. And this ran the gamut from the networks through the magazines.
And Case Closed, the book?
Case Closed is a prosecutor's argument for the case. He never even used the defense argument very well. He didn't. For example, his computer model, he used the Failure Analysis Bureau's prosecution of Oswald. He never even entered into the realm of the defense. So, you know, he only used one side of the argument. There's so much overlooked evidence, and it was not dealt with in this 30th anniversary.
Tell me, you've had an extraordinary career after screenplays from Scarface and Salvador, which came out in 1986, your first directorial effort. 1986. I mean, it seems to me when you look at Wall Street and you look at Born on the 4th of July, and you look at Platoon, I mean, help me out, the number of films you have made in 7 years. How have you changed? Where do you think you're going in your own head? And did this latest film, because it was a different film, it was a...
I've grown. I mean, I could not have made this movie 7 years ago or 8 years ago. I've become more, let's say, I've just matured. I see the other side of the equation more often. I'm more empathetic to other people. A woman's story is something I probably could not have done a few years ago.
You're close to your mother.
Very,
Jacqueline Stone,
yes.
You know, who lived in Paris. Was that part of the equation of this film? I mean,
well, she's always been saying to me that I should. She always wanted to make me to do Gone with the Wind, you know. And,
yes, right.
Clark Gable was.
She introduced you to movies because of her.
She always used to take me to the movies when I was a child, but I could. Why don't you ever make a love story? You know, she said.
And you would say what? I'm not
I said, I'm
ready.
not ready for it, but I think with Heaven and Earth, it's about as close as I could get.
But after this, the next two films one is about violence with Tommy Lee Jones in the lead, right?
Natural Born Killers.
Natural Born Killers, and also Noriega, which is certainly about violence.
Yes, they're different. No, I made Heaven and Earth, and I feel very good about it. And I mean, you know, I don't like to repeat the same mood necessarily right away. I'd like to go back, and I'm actually exploring with Noriega and Natural Born Killers more an element of comedy and satire.
Yeah, you also, Evita, you're going to bring to the screen.
Evita is a very strong woman's film, right. And I've been fascinated by that character for years.
And you believe that there's a real demand for films that are essentially driven by female character, that there is a market out there, all those people who say that women in the lead can't carry a film, don't understand the nature of America and the world, and
No, we've... I mean,
The power of good stories. Also, you produced Joy Luck Club, I should say.
We produced Joy Luck Club, and the tradition of movies from Garbo and Mary Pickford and Betty Davis, Katharine Hepburn. I mean, there's Joan Crawford. There's a strong tradition of females in film, and I think the film business is really kind of booming, and it's a golden age, and people are going to be making more and more of this.
Okay. I thank you. As we go out, I want to cancel the audience at home to see another clip from Heaven and Earth. Oliver Stone, the writer, the director, and the producer. My pleasure.
Thank you,
Great to
Charlie.
have you. Thanks. Roll tape.